welcome to Behind the Headlights, Speed Channel's documentary series that tells the stories of some very special automobiles. These are vehicles so unique that they changed history and impacted the moods and attitudes of generations. Coming to you from the Nethercutt Collection in Sylmar, California, I'm Bob Varsha, and I'll be your host as each episode of Behind the Headlights examines one extraordinary car. In this episode, we go behind the headlights of America's most treasured automotive icon, the Cobra, developed by the legendary Carroll Shelby. All his life, Shelby dreamed of producing his own sports car, and that ambition came to fruition with the Cobra. The wily Texan combined a lightweight, nimble European chassis with the torque and power of an American V8 engine. In 1962, the Cobra burst on the racing scene, captured the imagination of every automotive enthusiast in America, and ultimately beat the world's best on the racetrack. Only about 1,000 cars were ever produced. It all started with the very first Cobra, number CSX 2000. That car was built by Shelby and a band of ingenious California hot rodders. CSX 2000 and all the Cobra iterations that followed made a living automotive legend out of their creator, Carroll Shelby. In just a moment, Behind the Headlights, we'll take a look at the most important American sports car of the last half-century, the Cobra. 1961. Phil Hill became the first American to win the Formula One World Championship. A.J. Foyt won his first Indy 500 in a front-engined Offie Roadster. The 50th anniversary Indianapolis Classic was paced by a freshly restyled gold Ford Thunderbird. West Side Story thrilled moviegoers with a modern-day urban version of Romeo and Juliet. Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack performed at the Sands in Las Vegas by night and shot the original version of the film Ocean's 11 by day. Keeping things hot in the Bronx, Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle chased the home run record of the legendary Babe Ruth, with Maris eclipsing the Bambino on October 1st. Down and dirty, when the lights changed, Chevy's Big Block 409 and Pontiac's 421 Catalina were the cars to beat. Imports were called foreign cars, flashy sports models from Ferrari, Jaguar, and Aston Martin put the fun back into driving.
In the early 60s, it was really an interesting time, especially here in Southern California where Carroll Shelby was. Everybody was sort of blossoming into this notion that cars could be fun instead of just big, heavy, impressive things that you drove to the country club.
America had only one production sports car, the Chevy Corvette. It was ostensibly the only American car racing. All of that was about to change. Carroll Shelby, who'd won Le Mans in 1959 as a driver for Aston Martin, dreamed of a uniquely American sports car. He pictured an affordable, lightweight, great-handling, open two-seat roadster powered by a powerful and domestic V8 engine. It took the odd marriage of a small British specialty firm and one of Detroit's big three to make Shelby's dream come true. It became the only American car ever to win the World's Manufacturer Championship. And that was less than 3 years after going into production.
He had a vision and he stuck to it and he made it come true. It was bizarre. I mean, to take an old 1950 British car and drop a big engine in it, I mean, anybody can do that. Nobody succeeded at it except Shelby.
He took the two main streams in American automotive enthusiasm, especially in Southern California, hot rods and sports cars, and combined them.
The funnest thing about driving a Cobra is the satisfaction that you're driving a car that does everything better than any other car around you.
When they put the V8 in it, the light V8, it just had to be, you know, one of the finest sports cars that was ever made.
They had picked the right combination for endurance racing, and it was still fast enough so that the other guys were going to have to lean on theirs really hard to whip it.
It had a great look. It was very European, and boy, what a package! Oh, it was dynamite.
While Shelby's automotive inspiration sounded relatively simple, there were many who doubted it would really happen.
The idea was pretty outlandish. Here comes this Texas chicken farmer who wants to stick Ford motors in a little AC chassis. and go take on Corvettes and Ferrari.
I would say it is the most famous sports car in the last 40 years because it came along at the right time.
That was a pretty big coup for Carroll Shelby and for Ford.
289 was the car that made Shelby American. And that was the car on which we won the World Championship and hundreds, literally hundreds of races.
Somehow, very quickly, it was Cobra, powered by Ford. It was Shelby Cobra. It was American. And we were very excited and proud about that.
I think it really stands as being one of the most iconic cars of the post-war era. It's just when people think, especially Americans, when they think of the consummate sports car, the Cobra inevitably jumps to the top of the list.
Carroll Shelby had a lifelong love affair with the automobile. Growing up on a farm in East Texas, Shelby's life would take him down many different avenues, but always return him to his original goal of building his own car. Carroll Shelby was born in Leesburg, East Texas on January 11, 1923. His early interest in automobiles was encouraged by his father. He attended races at dirt track ovals and dreamed of being a race car driver.
In Texas, you could get your driver's license when you're 14 years old. My dad took me down the day after I was 14. I said, "Dad, can I take you to work?" He let me drive him to work. I went out and got caught doing 80 miles an hour. I didn't get to drive for 6 months. I was always screwing up as a kid in automobiles. Lucky, not only lucky I didn't get killed, I'm lucky I didn't kill somebody.
In 1942, Shelby joined the Army Air Corps. While there as an enlisted man, he started flying in a program called the Sergeant Pilots. Even then, Shelby had ambitions of building his own sports car.
I started building my own car and fiddling around with a friend of mine in Dallas named Ed Wilkins. We started taking an old chassis he had, which was a pretty good chassis for the time, and instead of a flathead Ford, we were going to put a Hemi in it. And I started driving Ed's MGTC in the local sport car races. That was about 1951.
It wasn't long before Shelby was driving Ferraris and Maseratis, and he quickly became one of the most successful post-war sports car racers and a leader in the burgeoning professional drivers movement.
When I first met Shelby, he was on the top of the heap as a driver. And I ended up getting a chance to race against him once, and he beat me, but I had led quite a bit, and that was a breakthrough for me.
Shelby was very, very good. He was a heady driver. He wasn't the wild-eyed quarter-mile specialist. He really was a very controlled, disciplined driver. He did extremely well, could make cars last.
Most people think of Carroll Shelby as the inventor of the Cobra and a car builder, but in the 1950s, he was one of America's very best sports car racers.
And as he traveled the world, he saw all the great workshops, Ferrari, Maserati, and through that, he saw how these people made limited production cars and made them successfully and made money from them.
In 1953, he drove in a Cadillac-powered British Allard Roadster. It was a devil to drive, but Carroll Shelby knew how to tame it. It was his belief that the formula for a fast sports car was to harness raw American V8 power to a lightweight chassis.
The old Allard that I drove for Roy Cherry Homes, we finished 10th. And that was about the time that Aston Martin and the Europeans were trying to sell their cars over here. So they were looking for American drivers. It gave me an opportunity to be around Aston Martin, Maserati, Ferrari, and see how they did business, because driving race cars wasn't my #1 priority. That was just to hold things together while I learned how to and got around to building my own car.
Shelby reached a notable pinnacle in his driving career when he won the 1959 Le Mans 24-Hour Classic in an Aston Martin DBR1, co-driving with Britain's Roy Salvadori.
It's kind of ironic that Salvadori and I won that. One time Phil said, "You know, you were lucky to win that race." I said, "Yeah, it takes a little lucky." I said, "You ever get lucky and win a race, Phil?"
Despite winning the most prestigious of races, Shelby kept working with various manufacturers to create his own sports car. In 1959, Shelby moved to California and got involved with several projects.
None of them successful, but I got to know Ed Cole and Harley Earl and those guys at General Motors real well. I went up to Ed one time and said, Ed, if you'll give me a Corvette, I'll take it to Italy and I'll put an aluminum body on and let's see if we can take 400 or 500 pounds. That was before I got smart enough to know you can't take a finished car and take weight out of it. Took it over to Scally Eddie. He said, I'll give you 3 of them. I took them over there and we built those beautiful bodies. I had them about 3/4 finished. I got a call for him one night. He says, hey, Shelby, Zora and McKenzie have gotten to the chairman. I don't know you. I never gave you those cars. Forget it.
As Shelby continued to try and build his own car, he kept racing, but his life had begun to take a decided turn.
Oh, during 1960, when I won the national championship, for the last time, I remember I took 5 or 6 nitroglycerin pills. Never thought about retiring. Knew I would someday. Finished the race. I said, that's it. There's no sense in keep on pushing my luck here.
Realizing he could die in the cockpit and kill other people, Shelby hung up his striped overalls in 1960 as America's national driving champion. AC Cars Limited of Thames Dutton in England, then owned by Charles, William, and Derek Hurlock, had been building sporty cars for decades using their own and acquired engines. AC Bristols competed successfully at Le Mans and won the GT class at Sebring from 1957 to 1959. But in the early 60s, the small company badly needed a shot in the arm.
In 1959, when Carroll Shelby won the 24-hour Le Mans driving an Aston Martin, the AC Ace Bristol won the 2-liter category that same year, and so it doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to see that the seeds were probably planted in Shelby's mind even back in '59 that, hey, here's a little car that has some potential.
I had read that AC Cars had lost their Bristol engine. They quit building the Bristol engine.
Coincidentally, Ford had a new lightweight, small, thin-wall casting V8.
I was introduced to a fellow named Don Fry, who took me in to see Lee Iacocca. I said, I think I can get a chassis from England, from AC. I need $25,000 and a few of your little V8 engines, and I can build a car that will blow off the Corvettes. Really? Well, they didn't believe it. So he told them, better give that kid $25,000 before he bites somebody.
And the next thing you know, he had put the thing together with basically little out-of-pocket expense.
In October 1961, Shelby immediately ordered 2 of the new lightweight 221 cubic inch Ford V8s to be sent to the AC Works.
Spent a lot of time at AC Cars. Built the first one, brought it over to California and put it in Dean Moon's shop. Engine had gone up to 260 inches by then.
Carroll Shelby already had a name for the new car, the venomous Cobra.
I had a dream. I wrote that name down. It came to me. A car makes the name doesn't make the car. You can call it anything you want to if it's an exceptional vehicle.
Shelby was finally ready to call on his hot rod friends to complete his revolutionary sports car. Shelby and his new team got right to work on the Cobra. Never much of a mechanic himself, Carroll had the knack for assembling a great team of people, many of them hot rodders.
His talent at putting people together, because not only did you have to get the contract, but you had to get enough guys to build it. And he got the top people in the business here on the West Coast.
There will never be another organization that had as many great people. They were all hot rodders that had dreams themselves.
Carroll Shelby was a very easy man to work for. He was very honorable to his crew. He got things done. I mean, he knew what he wanted and he got them done.
Phil Remington, Dean Moon, Roy Gamble, and others had cut their teeth racing on California's dry lakes. These guys knew all about fabrication and how to go fast. Reportedly, once the car arrived at Dean Moon's shop in Santa Fe Springs, the team got the first Cobra prototype running in just 8 hours. It was also the beginning of a high-powered relationship between Cobra creator Shelby and master fabricator mechanic Phil Remington.
Lance Reventlow was going out of the automobile business. He had a facility over in Venice, and he also had a genius fabricator named Phil Remington. I inherited the building and Phil Remington, and that's where we built the first Cobras.
Phil was a genius. I mean, the man was just unbelievable.
He was brilliant as an engineer, and what I learned from Phil is there's nothing that can't be done.
A lot of the higher-ups at Ford thought we were just a bunch of hot rodders and couldn't get the job done. All in all, we had a good group of guys, and they seemed to have a lot of spirit and worked well together.
In March of '62, the snake was hatched, but it wasn't ready to strike yet.
We built the second car that came over here, and that's what I took back to the Ford dealer meetings in 1962 in the spring. And that's the two that blew up in front of 4,000 dealers, and I thought that my ass was chopped liver, but Icoca let me get away with it, and we fixed the heating problem.
More modifications were still needed for the first Cobra. The rear suspension towers were changed. Disc brakes replaced the rear drums. The Ford engines were equipped with solid lifters, a more radical camshaft, bigger ports, and high compression pistons. Output was 260 horsepower at 6,000 RPM. Before delivery, every Cobra had a 30 to 40 mile road test. First tests at Riverside Raceway showed the Cobra's potential.
I ran quite a few laps and began to get a feeling for it and realized there were some things that needed to be taken care of. All you had to do was look at the weight and the power, and right away you knew it was going to be a fast car. It had an interesting suspension system that worked pretty good as far as getting rear-wheel traction coming off the corners. And it needed a little help to get the front end to work, but it was a pretty light, pretty well-balanced car.
It was sort of a cross between an old bucket of bolts and a stagecoach that would bounce along the old tough trails, and yet it had enough tires and enough brakes and enough hot-rodded engine that it would still go fast. So it was a lot of fun.
A team of sophisticated British craftsmen and a crew of California hot rodders had built a world-class sports car. The lusty Ford V8 more than doubled the output of the old Bristols with virtually no increase in weight. And the best was yet to come. Assembled in the UK, Cobra production began slowly. The chassis were built on a jig. Next, the suspension, transverse leaf springs, and disc brakes were added. Chassis were then shipped to one of two coach builders where the aluminum bodies were hand-built. The car received rave reviews. Orders started flowing in. The original price was listed as $5,995. Production would be limited.
The notion that for $5,000 or $6,000 you could have this car that was as good as a Ferrari was just great, and people ate it up.
Here's a hot rod in sports car clothing if you want to. This car will do everything. I mean, it just was magic.
I remember the Cobras and the sounds they'd make, and you'd see one going by, and like, wow, look at that, it's a Cobra, and it was a big event.
From the very first car, the Ford Motor Company was enthusiastically behind the promotion of the Cobra. Shelby not only knew racing and building, he was a master salesman.
A lot of times the way he would do it, he would go into a board meeting, and he would, with his Texas drawl, he would say, I'm just an old country boy from Texas, but he said, you know, I believe that I think that I would do it this way, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, that was the greatest idea that ever happened.
Charisma. If you ever saw Shelby and like Lee Iacocca drinking wine and lying to each other, it was a scream.
I think Carroll was, that uplifting spirit in the organization, and he's the one that kept selling the program, because I think it could have died very easily had he not been able to keep the spirit up and keep Ford interested in the program.
We have high hopes for all of these cars this year. We hope that by racing with Ford, we can make this an American year.
Shelby also had the clever idea of using that first car in an ingenious way.
We did an article in Sports Car Graphic, and then I think it was Road and Track wanted to do an article. They said, well, you did it in blue. Have you got another color? I said, no. He said, well, when you get one, we'll do the article. Well, shit, I just painted it yellow.
The media would come out and they would see the car. The one I first had, it was blue, and then it became red, it became different colors, and the media thought it was like 3 or 4 different cars.
And he always was able to deliver with some spectacular stuff. And the Cobra being the first one, the first of a long line of really spectacular cars.
Carroll Shelby had done a masterful job of building and marketing his automobile. Now the time had come for its debut on the racetrack. The Cobra not only began winning its early races, it consistently sped away from the competition, shocking the world's racing establishment. The Cobra prototype was about to establish a racing legacy. It was incredibly fast, but it wasn't easy to drive.
Can't say it was sophisticated because it really wasn't. And it was very difficult to drive because it was so lightweight and a lot of torque that you had to really be on top of it.
The suspension was nothing to write home to Mother about. The power was excellent, torquey. It was a package that had to be driven well.
First time I drove it, it was one of those cars that would go around a corner and lean and all the tires would fold under, and everything was based on something that wasn't competitive. It was slower than the Corvette. And then we made a few changes and we were about the same amount quicker, over a second a lap quicker than the Corvette.
On October 23rd, 1962, the Cobra was ready for its first race.
The Times Grand Prix in the fall was the biggest sports car race in America, and it was the debut of the Cobra and the Stingray coincidentally at the very same race, and the Cobra just drove away from it.
As soon as that car raced at Riverside Raceway against the Stingray, no one could believe it was that fast.
Literally almost from the beginning, from the first race, we knew we had something special.
No one knows better than Billy Krause, the first person to race the Cobra.
I was surprised at how good the little car ran. It had a real constant power band. It didn't have, it wasn't cammy or anything. It didn't only pull at the upper end. It had good torque from the bottom and ran all the way up to the top clean. Not spectacular, but it seemed to be reliable. The engine really never gave us any problem. It was, the chassis that broke.
The car was just streets ahead of anything else, and Billy Krause had a huge lead, and they had a mechanical problem, which is to be expected in any car's first race.
Axle broke and the wheel fell off, so Stingray won the first race, but they didn't have a chance against the Cobra.
Shelby was more blunt about the Cobra versus Corvette rivalry.
Cobra teammate Dave McDonald kicked the shit out of him. Wasn't even a race. I don't think we ever lost another race for the next 3 or 4 years against the Corvettes.
They put the fear of God in them, and I think the handwriting was on the wall.
Veteran drivers like Bob Varsha were awed by the new, powerful Cobra.
I drove the Corvettes before I drove the Cobras. Those were winning, but then Shelby came out with the Cobra, and we thought, boy, this is going to be great.
There was no way to stop these things. They were just awesome. It didn't hurt that he had some of the very best road racing drivers in America.
Carroll just pulled together an amazing crew of drivers. Dan Gurney, Phil Hill, Fireball Roberts, who was NASCAR's greatest star at the time.
And the team had a lot of spirit. It was incredibly successful for actually the small team that it was.
It's a gallery of legends.
With fewer than 75 Cobras built, the new 289 cubic inch V8 became available with high-performance specifications.
First 60 cars we had a Worman sector steering, which was pretty archaic, and that's one of the first things that I requested that they do is put a rack-and-pinion on it. We were pretty confident that the old car would hold together if we put the 289 in it.
The 289 was the car. It was the right balance. It was the car that, just had it all.
289 was the car that made Shelby American.
In March of 1963, the great Ken Miles joined the team and finished second in an SCCA national race.
Really, the team driver was Ken Miles, who was terrific.
He could get in the car and he could drive it, and he could virtually, he'd come in and say, you know something, when we hit the bumps, it's going to rip the suspension off it. We've got to make the suspension stiffer. He could just pinpoint it so quickly, it was unbelievable.
The same year, Dave McDonald scored the Cobra's first win at an SCCA race at Riverside.
McDonald was an incredible driver. I'd say they put each other on the map, at least on a local level, and then later on an international level.
Shelby's Cobra was conquering the American racing scene.
I raced them several times over here and won most every time I drove the car because the car was good and had the horsepower. It didn't handle all that well, but you could drive the car at a four-wheel drift, four-wheel slide, and steer it on the throttle.
These were supposedly production cars, and yet they often took the oil cooler off them to make them modified cars. They'd win the production car race, then they'd put them in the modified car race, and they'd win that too.
The Cobras were unbeatable on the racetrack in 1962 and 63. In 1964, the Cobras won the USRRC Manufacturers Championship.
Decimated the field. At the beginning, the Ferraris were some competition, but by the time the season was over, as the Cobras improved from race to race, there was no contest. And at that point, the decision was made to go to Europe and contest the World's GT Championship.
But the Roadster's aerodynamics would not allow the car to hit the speeds required to win over all the longer, faster European circuits. So Shelby would once again hit the drawing boards and design an even more unstoppable Cobra, the Daytona Coupe.
We decided that we would go after Ferrari, but we knew we couldn't do it with a 289 because it was like pushing a brick through the air, 140 miles an hour. Power to weight ratio was the king then, and it's the king now.
Shelby came out with a new, improved Cobra, the Daytona Coupe, in 1964.
It looked extremely European, but extremely American as well. And I thought it was genius on wheels.
Although the exterior looked different, under the new skin still beat the heart of the same powerful CSX 2000 Cobra.
Very aerodynamic. Tested it out at Riverside Raceway and found that the car went much quicker. The chassis was stiffer, which made it handle better. We won everything over here in the U.S.
When they developed the Cobra Coupe, then they had a car that was equal with the Ferrari on some courses. Ferrari probably still was better at road holding, but with only a 3-liter engine versus the Cobra's 5-liter engine, it was quite a contest.
My most memorable job in a Cobra was at Spa in the first, I think it was the first Daytona Coupe. By the time we got through sticking little wings and flippers and dams and things all over it, it would go like a bullet.
The ultimate adaptation was the high-speed capabilities of the Cobra Daytona Coupe. Those cars were unbeatable.
Shelby set his sights on Ferrari, Europe, and the FIA World Manufacturers Championship. And the car proved to be as dominant in Europe as in America.
The Cobras did so well once they got accustomed to the tracks in Europe, where they weren't as smooth. They had places like at the Nürburgring where the cars actually got airborne.
I raced it over in Europe with Dan Gurney, Joe Slesser, German driver and French driver, and we beat the Ferrari's best.
Bob was a terrific teammate to have. He could certainly hold up his end of it, and we had a car which was remarkably good, even though it was several hundred pounds heavier than the Roadster, and it didn't accelerate quite as rapidly. It had about at least 20 miles an hour more top speed just because of the shape of the body.
Joe Schlesser and Richard Atwood won the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile GT class at the Nürburgring. With Bob Bondurant behind the wheel, it also won the GT class at Le Mans.
We ran that car at Le Mans in 1964. Dan Gurney and I co-drove together. We ran down the Mulsanne Straight 192 miles an hour. And we finished 4th overall behind 3 Ferrari prototypes, which are much faster.
In that particular race, we were actually threatening with an overall win until we had a problem with an oil cooler that sprang a leak. So then we had to take it easy on the car to keep the oil from getting too hot.
The cars were very evenly matched. Ferrari would win a couple races, Cobra would win a couple races. As it got down toward the end of the season, old man Ferrari thought he might get beat.
Monza had 6 Daytona coupes all lined up for those GTOs. A GTO wasn't even close on a fast course like Monza. It wouldn't even been close. But Mr. Ferrari, being the consummate Italian that he is, got the race canceled.
Thus allowing Ferrari to maintain their lead.
Ferrari's controversial ploy to win the FIA didn't last long.
Next year, it was no contest.
Yes, 1965 was an even better racing year. A Cobra Daytona driven by Hal Keck, Bob Johnson, and Joe Schlesser took second at the Daytona 2,000-kilometer race. The Daytona Coupe also took first in GT at Sebring. At the Nürburgring, the Coupes won the GT class, and Cobra won the FIA championship. It was the first and only time an American car had won.
Ferrari had won almost every hill climb. And when I drove for Carroll in 1964 and 65 in Europe, I won every hill climb that we did. And that helped us win the World Manufacturers Championship.
Most of those GTOs ran 4-liter engines, but they still couldn't handle that little 4.7 push-rod engine that we had.
And we beat Ferrari for the very first time. We were racing at Reims, France, July 4th, and that felt fantastic.
Cobra Roadsters and Coupes had certainly shown what they could do. However, Shelby was convinced the 289 Cobra had reached its development peak. He firmly believed the old American adage, there's no substitute for cubic inches. The next iteration of the CSX 2000 would be the powerful 427 Cobra. The Mark II Cobras received a newly designed and strengthened chassis. This became the Cobra 427.
We knew the Corvette was coming out with a Grand Sport. So we took a 289 chassis, Miles did, and put a 427 in it. And it was pretty ugly. In fact, so ugly we called it the Turd. But we knew that we couldn't keep on racing that car with that old chassis. So Klaus Arning, a German engineer at Ford, proposed that we build another chassis. The 427 chassis was the first chassis ever done completely on a computer.
Shelby's new big block Cobra, the Mark III, the CSX 3000, bore little resemblance to its CSX 2000 forebearer.
The 427 was a big step. It was, for all intent and purposes, a new car. Different steering, different suspension, larger brakes, more roll protection. Still looked sort of like a Cobra, but one that had taken a lot of protein powder and developed an attitude at the same time.
Has what they call a 427 side oiler motor in it, especially designed and built, and the car really performs fantastic. Great motor, more fun to drive from that point of view.
It's more brutal in its power, but far more sophisticated in its ride quality. It has coil springs where the 289 Cobra has leaf springs. It's a different feel when you drive the car.
A big block Cobra with its wider track, bellowing engine, and pumped-up bodywork was a formidable racing car, or a scary street beast. Car and Driver magazine tested one 427 example and achieved an astonishing 0 to 100 mile an hour to 0 in 14.5 seconds on street tires.
The 427 was a heavy motor, and it made a huge amount of torque. Single carburetor version would make 450 foot-pounds of torque without any trouble at all. No sweat.
The 427's official production ended with the CSX 3360. There was no place for an anachronism like the 427 Cobra. In 1967, when Shelby saw restrictive regulations choking the performance automotive industry, he sold Cobra to Ford and moved to Africa to become a big game hunter.
Moved around Africa, did whatever I wanted to do. Whenever in the business, had hunting companies. I was in Central Africa, got run out of there.
Today, the original Cobras can still be found terrorizing tracks in vintage racing. Cobra events are held across the country and around the world. Lynn Park's famous Cobra Day on the Peterson Automotive Museum rooftop attracts over 100 original Cobras. At major auto auctions, such as the Barrett-Jackson Extravaganza in Scottsdale, Arizona, correct, authenticated Cobras have reached six-figure sums.
In the comp cars, depending on its race pedigree, they'll bring $650 to $750. And the 289s, which are really strong right now, will bring $175 to over $200. To own one of the real original 427 Cobras is really something. I think right now they're still very, very undervalued to what they're going to be.
With a lifetime of incredible achievements behind him, Shelby remains at the forefront of automotive development. Today, Shelby is still building cars at the Shelby Automobile Company factory in Las Vegas, just finishing a successful run of the ultra-high-tech Oldsmobile-powered roadster called the Shelby Series 1. In 2004, Ford turned to Shelby once again and unveiled a new Cobra for the new millennium.
Bill Ford Jr., the CEO and chairman of Ford Motor Company, Jay Mays, who's in charge of Ford Design, and Shelby got together. It was time to see if a new Cobra could capture the magic of the old one.
I think it's going to be a very solid car.
However, for purists, the original Cobra was and always will be the best.
The people who really love Cobras and cherish them today, for the most part, are people who remember when this car came along and how it kind of stood the international world on its ear, and it was an American car.
The car has a user-friendliness to it. And you're out in the open, you've got some wind and you've got the noise, and it's responsive and power to weight good, the brakes work great. No wonder it's popular, because there isn't anything else around that has those same qualities. It's like the old hot rod days.
Over 40 years after its debut, the pioneering Shelby Cobra still brings a certain sense of appreciation, admiration, and enjoyment.
In its day, it was remarkable, and it was great fun to drive.
When it gets down to just sheer automotive power and fury, I don't think there's anything that says it better than a Cobra.
It has the stamp of one single person on it, and I know Carroll will be the first one to say, no, this was a team effort, everybody helped. But you know, it's so identified with this remarkable man, Carroll Shelby, that also means that people are always going to love this car. It was the Shelby Cobra.
This is a car with a real American muscle car V8 in it, and this is a car that still today will hold its own as a real performer.
It was spectacular looking, and it won.
As guys think back to what they really longed for in high school beside the homecoming queen, it was a Cobra.
For the people who built the Cobra, it was a truly unforgettable time.
It was probably the fondest part of my career. I knew that I could be a winner in a car.
We all felt as though this was, we were almost dead and gone to heaven, sort of being in this team.
I thought it was wonderful. I absolutely loved it. I couldn't wait to get to work in the morning, so I knew I was going to learn something new every day.
The Cobra was often underestimated, so you were underdogs and you had a good chance of doing well, and you could wave the flag, and it sounded like a hot rod anyway, and it was just a fabulous time.
I think everybody will tell you that ever worked there that it was probably the greatest experience of their life. It was mine.
Carroll Shelby has touched many lives and left everyone who has met him with lasting memories.
I really love Carroll Shelby and what he stood for America, and where he put us in the world standing for car racing. And as I got to know Carroll, when we were going to have our first child, I named my daughter after Carroll. Her name is Shelby.
Shelby's been very influential in my life. There's no one else like Carroll Shelby. Carroll is fantastic.
Carroll Shelby probably has as much to do with why the car is famous as the car itself.
He always treated everybody equally, and he was one of the ones that really
always had a sense of humanity about him, and he was always willing to share the glory.
He sent me to Europe on my own as technical advisor to the Allen racing team. I was petrified. I was 23 years old. He took chances with people, which is amazing.
Having survived 3 bypass surgeries and a full heart transplant, Shelby vowed to dedicate his life to others.
So I promised while I was in the hospital, there was a couple of kids that passed away because there wasn't a heart available for them. And I said, I'm going to try to help if I can. And I formed the Carroll Shelby Children's Foundation.
A decade ago, due to kidney failure, many doubted that he would still be around.
Thought that was the end of the road for me in '95. My son gave me a kidney. My son, Michael, is my savior.
And like Carroll Shelby, the very first CSX 2000, which is still in his possession, has also survived the trials and tribulations of life. The prototype CSX 2000 was a milestone and a forebear of an American promise. Driven by Shelby's dream team, the Cobras were consistently victorious at the most important races around the world. In 1965, the Cobra became the only American car to ever win the FIA championship.
To accomplish what the Cobra accomplished and to be remembered as well as it's remembered 40 years later, I think that in history that's quite an achievement.
It was a car that would give a country national pride, make drivers into heroes, and catapult its creator into America's greatest living automotive legend.
He's just a car enthusiast. I mean, he is literally as enthusiastic today as he was when he was a kid in Texas. And I think it's a remarkable story.
If you had a checklist of all the things that were required, you would check every box for Carroll Shelby. Perhaps someone else could have done it. What's important is that Shelby did it.
The otherwise ordinary marriage of the British AC Ace chassis with a large American V8 engine begat one extraordinary automobile. The larger-than-life story of Carroll Shelby and his creation, the Cobra, is not only a part of automotive history, it's become a part of American folklore. There's never been another sports car that has inspired such devotion and loyalty. After more than 40 years, appreciation for the Shelby Cobra and for the man who created it remain one and the same. Rest assured that as long as sports cars are built, Carroll Shelby's CSX 2000 and its successors will be the standard by which all others are measured and the dream of every automotive enthusiast. I'm Bob Varsha for Behind the Headlights. Join us again soon for the story of another extraordinary automobile.